So I've had some questions on the Facebook group for wind synth players about how to get the DSI Mopho to play friendly with wind controllers. So I'm going to show you how to go from this sound which doesn't really work so well. It's not very intuitive to use that with a wind controller. It's much more designed for little MIDI controller or something. So what I've got right now, the setup, just to give you an idea, so I'm using a Yamaha WX5. That's going into, this is a little breakout box that provides power to the WX5. I have that going into the Mopho through a MIDI merger. So what's happening is that I've got my audio interface that is connected to my computer, and that is going also into the MIDI merger, this little box in the back there, so that I'm able to control the Mopho with my WX and with the computer at the same time. So both of those outputs are going into the MIDI merger, and then that's going into the Mopho's MIDI in, and then the Mopho MIDI out is going back into the audio box, so that when I move the program knob on the Mopho, I can see those changes immediately in the Mopho LE editor. So this is just the free version of the editor. And I also want to point out that I'm using a custom version of the firmware for this that I don't think that they officially released. Sorry, my son is in the background here. So that firmware fixes a glitch when using breath control as what happens is if you begin a sound with breath control at the maximum level, so like you start inputting like with the hardest amount of breath, then you'll get some sort of like weird fluttery glitchy thing. Try it. If you play really hard at the beginning of the sound and hold it, it'll go and then it'll hold. So the custom firmware that they sent me through their forums a few years back kind of fixes that problem. So I'll put a link to a Google Drive on that in the video description. So, the first setting for the first thing to do is to find what I'm going to show you to do is basically finding a preset that kind of works and then modifying it so that it works well with the breath controller. So I find that this is kind of a better way to go about it than trying to build a sound from scratch, at least when you're first learning. And I am by far not the most advanced user of analog synths, but anyway, the Mopho LE editor is pretty user friendly. So not probably is turn the sequencer off, and then maybe we can see what the sound actually is. Okay, so that's kind of a cool bass sound, but I don't really want to try to modify that for wind controller playing. Yeah, my son is really having a great old time in the room next door. So, you kind of go through and you find a program that will kind of work. So, I found this inverted filter saws preset, which kind of does some cool things. Here's my edit of this. Which this kind of worked out kind of neat. If you play really, really low and kind of with a gentle bit of air, you can kind of do the kind of cool dubstep thing, and then when you go to play high, you can actually do this kind of cool lead sound. So that's going to be the end result is this patch. So I'll show you how I get there. So I'm going to go back to the original sound. You know, you can try finding this one. Which also could have worked. I just kind of found this one. So this original sound, the problems with this is really designed for a keyboard player. And one of the issues of it is that well, first of all, it doesn't respond to your air at all. It has basically one dynamic, and you can see that in the amplitude, that it has basically one volume level throughout the duration of the sound, and then it decays. That decay is a real problem for us, because if you play a note, and if you're like me, you have your pitch bend set up so that you can go slightly under pitch on your on the mouthpiece. And then you notice when I let go of that mouthpiece, the pitch drops all the way down as low as it'll go based on your settings of your mouthpiece. So that's really awkward. So the first thing that I will want to do is take this release and drop it to 0. So that when you stop playing, the sound stops and we don't have any issue with that. Now all of this, already this is much better, just because it doesn't have that decaying quality to it. So you gotta fix that amp release. Basically your amplifier should look like this square. Whenever you create a preset for a breath controller, if you have pitch bend associated with your mouthpiece, you definitely want to have this amp section set basically to look like a square. So yeah, my son is quite loud in the background again, sorry. So then the next thing that we want to do is start passing our breath destination to a couple of places. So you have 5 different places that you can send breath to on the Mopho. The first one is through this right here. And then you can set each of these modulators to also be the MIDI breath. So you can set up to 5 different places that your breath can control in any of the rest of this program. So the first thing I want to do is I want to control my breath to the envelope 2 amount. Now this is where it gets to be a little bit confusing. We have 3 different envelopes on the Mopho, and they're labeled differently in different parts of this program, and so this is a little bit unintuitive. Low pass filter is envelope 1. Amp, which is the volume basically, is envelope 2, and then envelope 3 is kind of you can set envelope 3 to do kind of lots of different things. We're going to leave it as being the oscillator all frequency for now. But I think we're gonna change that a little bit. So anyway, so we want to change the breath destination to envelope 2 amount. So what this is going to do is it's going to basically mean that we're going to control the volume of this with our breath. And so to make this the most effective, you want to max this out. So envelope 2 amount, you want to set that to 127. You can also set this to VCA Level. These basically do the same thing, okay? Then you want when you set this to either one of those parameters, you can kind of mix and match whether you're doing VCA Level or the amount, but they're basically the same thing. VCA Level is just an always-on thing. Amount has to do with when you play the sound. So they effectively do the same thing for us as wind controllers. But you want to leave VCA Level at 0. But if you set the amount to, basically this is going to be your lowest volume that you're going to be able to play. Now for this sound, I'm not going to set that to 0. I'm going to set that to like basically 1/4 of our maximum. I'm going to set that to 24. So now I have some control over the volume of the sound. Now some of this is being really hidden by this low pass filter setting. So this is being this might interact with the envelope 3. What can be kind of cool to do with this is to set the oscillator envelope 3 to be envelope 1 amount. which will kind of give you this kick of sound at the beginning. So you hear it doesn't just start at 0 like it did before. But if we set it to, where was that? Envelope 1 amount. Then we get this kind of attack at the beginning. So that's one thing that you can do. I'm going to set this to something different. I'm going to set this to the mix between the two oscillators. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to move from one of these to the other as we go through the...
Daddy?
Oh, yes, buddy.
What the...
So I'm not going to edit this at all. I'm just going to pause the video when I get interrupted. So oscillator mix, what you can do with this is, so this is a pretty bass heavy setting, and I'm going to raise the pitch of this overall. But what you can do with that oscillator mix, basically this would be all oscillator 1, and then this is all oscillator 2. So, you know, oscillator 1 is, you know, this pitch level and this type of sound wave. And then oscillator 2 is also, you can set the same thing, and then you can blend between the two of them. So if we set this to be an even mix, basically right up the center, it's going to just change it a little bit over the course of time, and that might be dependent on like what octave. So let's say we want this to be a C5, so oscillator 2 is going to be an octave up. So over the course of time we get a different octave through this. Somebody's excited for ice cream or something. So now the next thing we want to do is address this low pass filter, because this is going to be the other place that your like breath is going to be the most controlling. So first thing we want to do is set this to, well, okay, we can set this one to MIDI breath, and we're going to make this set to low pass. And this is basically going to control the amount for envelope 1. So low pass is the same as envelope 1 amount. I'm pretty sure that they're identical in the program. Now what I'm going to, you can adjust this based on the sound that you're going for. But the other thing we want to do is we want to get rid of this slow ramp up here. So this is the attack. So this ADSR. So you want to read up on how to control analog synths. But basically for wind controllers, we want to move this attack really pretty early. You know, at most kind of in the low 20s or something like that. And then decay, we want this at 0. You don't want any decay on this, but you want the sustain maxed. So this way, when you control the amount knob with your breath, you're controlling what's happening during the sustain. Now the release doesn't really make all that much difference, because the release happens during the release section of the amplifier, and since we're not going to get any sound in that, it's not going to make any difference. There's a little bit of a tail end of it though that still happens. So by doing what I just did, by kind of squaring off the low pass filter, and you can make this totally square like the amplifier level 2, and then adjusting your low pass level so that you can control kind of how much of your breath is opening that filter and closing it. And so I'm going to tweak this just a little bit, and this is all going to be based on kind of the sound that you want. And I'm going to take the velocity setting. The velocity setting is your attack. So I find that having velocity set to anything in low pass or in amplitude limits my control with the breath ultimately, because what happens is that your initial attack controls the maximum level you can get when you edit, when you blow harder. So if your velocity is set to something like this, your attack, the initial sound that you create, is going to limit how loud you or open the filter can get. So the problem with that is that if you play softly at the beginning, your crescendo can only reach a certain maximum point. So it's better to leave that, in my opinion, to 0. Although sometimes I'll do something with envelope 3 and I'll have it only be based on the velocity, and it'll be the short peak at the beginning of the sound, kind of like the chiff at the beginning of your, like at the reed sound. So if we remove the velocity and we make more control out of the breath, then we now, instead of having that thing slowly move over time, I'm controlling that with how hard I blow. So, you know, you can tweak the frequency a little bit. So like maybe 119 is a little too high. You know, you drop that into the 100s. So blow as hard as you can and then see if that's where you want the frequency to be. If you want it to be a darker sound. So that's kind of the nice thing about being able to control both in real time, is that you can kind of adjust this while you're playing to see like what's your maximum breath going to do. The resonance is especially effective when you have this 4-pole thing checked. And this is where that at a really low note, that's really affected by the resonance knob here. So we want the decay set to 0, because otherwise we have kind of a weird, well, it actually probably doesn't really matter too much if your sustain is at 127. That's the thing, when you're controlling so many of these things with the breath, some of the parameters don't really matter anymore. So then, let's see, what other MIDI breath destinations did I have? Oh yeah, that's right. The audio mod on this kind of adds a little bit of like distortion or something. So if we set this to MIDI breath set to the audio mod, and then I don't like too much of this, so you know, somewhere in the, maybe we'll do something like 50 something. So you hear what that did when I turned that up. So it kind of adds this extra color to it. Some of that's being affected by these LFOs down here, and by the fact that we have a slightly out of tune to oscillators. That kind of thing is the inherent kind of quality of the tone of the initial sound. So I try to leave those be, but you can kind of mess with them while you play to see what they're going to do. So now the other thing is that this is really meant to be like, it slides around a lot. Oh, and now you notice I'm trying to play it with the keyboard and it doesn't even work anymore, because I'm not using, because my my filter won't open, because I'm controlling it with the breath. Now what I find a little bit unusual when you play is to have these glide knobs set too much. When you're playing a keyboard, this can be kind of cool. It's the thing where it basically glissandos between the notes. I don't like to set that very high at all, because it doesn't feel natural as a wind instrument to do that. So I like generally to set those at 0, and you can, I don't think that it matters if you go to fixed rate or fixed time. Immediate change. If we kind of bring those back to these levels here. So it takes some time for it to actually get there. So depending on what you're going for, you might want a little bit of glide. You're probably used to adjusting glissando if you're watching this video. The other thing that you might find unique, depending on how you have these 3 envelopes set, the last note or any of these won't matter on the Mopho, because it's just a monosynth and you're playing a monophonic instrument. But the RT setting means re-trigger. So what that means is that when you change pitches, it'll act like you articulated, whether you did it or not. So if you, sometimes you like this, depending on the sound, like it'll give you that kind of percussive sound as you're going through. Now this sound isn't doing that because I don't really have anything in this 3rd envelope that's going to change, in any of the envelopes it's really going to change. But let's see if I move this. I had figured out a way to show this, the difference here. You can kind of hear a little bit of the, like the tick, not from the keys of the WX5, but from the sound of the oscillators itself. it's more smooth if you don't use the re-trigger. So that's not really doing all that much for this particular sound. On some sounds, though, that re-trigger is going to make a really big difference. So, you know, if you're like, it's like I'm re-articulating all the time, it's probably because you have that set to re-trigger. So the other thing is that I just don't like how much the mod wheel, that's kind of doing a vibrato sound. The mod wheel, you can see, is set to LFO amount, and it goes to 36. So if you go to LFO 1, that's this down here, this is the all oscillators, all frequency. So that's basically the pitch. So this is a pitch vibrato in a triangle shape, which is just kind of a natural up and down. So if you want that to be faster, you can just increase the amount of that. Although that seems to be adjusting the frequency. So let's actually tame that a little bit and instead speed that up. Oh, that's not what I want. How did I get this set before? Yeah, something like this. So I don't remember what it was set at before, but you know, you kind of just tweak the 3 knobs related to the LFO that your mod wheel is adjusting. But that's your simplest way to get a vibrato out of this, is to set probably a triangle, or since it doesn't look like there's a sine wave here, to the all oscillator frequency. So that's going to be your kind of your pitch bend. So that, I think that's basically it. Now what you can also do is just these assign, these are related to the 4 knobs on the Mopho. So when you're playing, if you want to add some bass into that, you can just turn knob 1, get that up to kind of a high amount. And then sub-octave 2 is set to parameter 2. So if you're used to adjusting, you know, the Mopho in general, hopefully you're familiar with that. But that can be a nice thing to add in. Interestingly enough, you know, if you want to set your MIDI breath, you can source that to a sub oscillator 1, and then that way when you blow harder, you're going to bring in the lower octave. Even more than what the amplifier would naturally do. So right now I have the sub octave set to 58. If let's turn that off, and we'll just set the oscillator to 58. We'll kind of A/B this sound. I'll play a lower. Now if we make that back to the MIDI breath, so that's, you know, kind of doing more, it's bringing in more of it as I play louder. So if I want kind of a middle ground sound, I don't just blow quite so hard. Now, if you don't like that kind of arpeggiating sound, that's coming from the resonance. So you can turn that down, it kind of tames that filter a bit. So that, you know, that again, that's, to me, that's a characteristic of the sound that we came up with initially. But this is the kind of thing that, like, you can start with this one patch, get to something that's kind of expressive for you, that feels good to play on, and then start messing with, you know, the fine-tuned frequencies. This gives you that kind of chorus sound, or find different shape to kind of see how that changes the basic tone, right? So those are just basic analog synth things. But your most important thing here is setting your breath destination or MIDI breath. Those are the same thing. Again, it's just one of those quirks with the software. They name the same thing differently depending on where you are in the program. MIDI breath set to low pass, your low pass filter, or to envelope 1 amount. They feel a little bit different, but they basically give the same sound. And then MIDI breath to the VCA level or amp. You can also use envelope 2 amount. That does basically the same thing. For our purposes anyway. Maybe they mean something different to a keyboard player, I don't know. So there you have it. That's how I go about kind of finding patches for the Mopho, and how I can adjust them. Now, a couple of other things that I'll do. If you set this to noise, this is kind of a cool thing. It's under the oscillators, yeah. Noise level, and then you kind of turn this up and you set this to velocity, so that it's affected by your initial attack, and you want to keep this peak short like this. What will happen is when you articulate, you'll get a bunch of this kind of sound at the beginning. See if I turn that off. You hear there's a little bit of like air sound at the beginning. If I'll slow down what's happening here. So you can add that sound to the very beginning, maybe make the attack 0, and maybe the decay just a little bit longer, and set it all to be controlled by the velocity, but maybe a whole bunch of it. So that's too much, so let's lower the decay, make it real spiky. Maybe not quite enough. So you can kind of tweak that. That gives you, you know, a lot of wind instruments have this quality at the very beginning of the note that has this kind of noise to it. And this gives that kind of natural sense. That's something that if you do the retrigger, the amount of this. Oh, I have to turn the velocity down for you to hear this. Should be a little bit more audible than that. So you can kind of, you know, tweak a bunch of stuff that's like that for the beginning of the sound, because the beginning of the sound and the sustain kind of make a lot of the quality. So anyway, hope that was helpful. I know I went kind of long, but you know, getting really in depth in what the destinations mean when creating a synth patch for your WX.